Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea reports more than 300 new cases of the coronavirus, the highest figure since late March. The outbreak stems from a church in Seoul and a mass demonstration held last weekend. President Moon Jae-in tells officials to press criminal charges against those who interfere with quarantine efforts. The government, he says, needs to show authority, especially in the middle of a pandemic. And South Korea's exports so far this month are down by 7% from a year ago. The on-year decline is the same as it was last month, suggesting they may have bottomed out. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The number of newly confirmed COVID-19 cases in South Korea has surpassed 300 again, most of them local transmissions. To contain the spread, South Korea's prime minister is urging people who took part in a big rally last weekend to get tested as soon as possible. Hong Yoo reports.
324 people in South Korea were newly confirmed with COVID-19 on Friday, the biggest daily increase since March. Only 9 of the new cases were imported from overseas. The rest were transmitted locally. The total number confirmed since last Friday, when community transmissions started picking up in South Korea, is now 1,900. Most of them stem from the Seoul Church in northern Seoul and the anti-government rally that was held in downtown Seoul last Saturday. To try and contain the second wave that's mostly centered in metropolitan areas such as Seoul, Gyeonggi-do Province, and Incheon, Prime Minister Jung Se-kyun says visitors to the Seoul Church and last weekend's protesters should be tested as a priority.
The government is cooperating with mobile carriers to have all participants of last Saturday's rally tested. If you have been notified by the local government that you are subject to COVID-19 testing, please do it as soon as possible. We'll do our best to protect your identity.
On Thursday, health authorities tried to get their hands on a list of Seoul Church followers by visiting the church with police officers. This came as the church only provided a list of around 900 people when 2,000 to 3,000 people are known to attend it. Now the government is only allowing virtual services for churches in metropolitan areas and is asking other regions to avoid holding in-person services if possible. Hong Yoo, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in has called for stern legal action to be taken against those who disrupt the country's quarantine measures. He made the remarks Friday while inspecting quarantine operations in Seoul amid a continued spike in the number of new cases in the past week. Moon stressed the need for the government to demonstrate authority in its efforts to protect the people, especially in the middle of a pandemic.
역학조사나 방역 조치를 방해하는 일들이 있다면 그런 일들에 대해서는 감염병 관리법뿐만 아니라 공주병 방해라든지 다른 형사 범죄도 적용해서 이렇게 단호하게 법적 대응을 하고 필요할 경우에는 현행법 체포라든지 구속영장을 청구한다든지 이렇게 엄중한 법 집행을 보여주기 바랍니다.
Some religious groups, including Seoul Church, have not been cooperating with the government. The authorities have been scrambling to secure a full list of its members, with more than 730 cases found to be linked to the church so far. President Moon said that success in terms of quarantine depends on swift tracing and testing, calling on the authorities to work with a determination to protect the entire country by curbing the spread in Seoul. South Korea has decided to cancel this year's regular field training for its reserve forces. This is the first time the military has canceled reserve training in the field since it was first implemented in 1968. It was supposed to start in September, though scaled down and delayed by a month because of the pandemic, and there would have been nearly 3 million service members taking part. But considering the recent surge in cases in the capital area, Seoul's defense ministry decided to move the exercises online. South Korean men take part in 1 to 3 days of training annually for 6 years after completing their mandatory military service. Researchers around the world are reporting that they're getting closer and closer to a COVID-19 vaccine. A pharmaceutical unit of the American firm Johnson & Johnson says it could have one ready by early next year. That company, which operates all around the world, is called Janssen. Choi Won-jung spoke with one of its representatives for the Asian region.
Around the world, people are desperate to know when a vaccine for COVID-19 will be available. Dr. Paul Korshow, The vice president of medical affairs for Asia Pacific from pharmaceutical company Janssen says possible vaccine batches could be ready as early as the first quarter of 2021.
We expect, depending on the early results that emerge from those phase 3 studies, to be able to have vaccine available for use by the public in the beginning of 2021.
Johnson & Johnson announced on Thursday that it plans to begin its phase 3 trial in September with up to 60,000 people. But this particular vaccine development is different from others. It's called AdVac technology, and this is how it works. Scientists create inactivated virus that carries what's called a spike protein. This creates a robust immune response that protects against the virus exposure.
The reason that the spike protein is so important, and a lot of other companies are choosing that same protein, is because it seems to generate a robust immune response, and it seems to be relatively well conserved.
Worldwide distribution can follow once the trials are completed. However, Dr. Kershaw says it's not about which country gets the vaccine first, but who needs the most, like healthcare workers and those who live in active COVID-19 hotspots, including South Korea.
We are working very diligently with countries all around the world, including the South Korean government. So we're currently having discussions with government officials to talk about how we can quickly make the vaccine available.
The company has set a maximum price of $10 per dose during the emergency pandemic period. Although it will depend on clinical results, Janssen is pursuing single-dose measurement, meaning hopefully one vaccine shot will provide enough immunity for people to last during the pandemic period. He added that this COVID-19 vaccine development is a unique collaboration between companies and government, and unlike anything he has seen before. He's hoping this remains the case even after pandemic ends. 태원종, Arirang News.
In the U.S., Joe Biden has accepted the nomination of the Democratic Party as its candidate for president in the November election. Standing in a largely empty arena in his home state of Delaware on Thursday, he vowed to heal a country battered by the pandemic and divided, he claimed, by 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency.
The current president has cloaked American darkness for much too long. Too much anger, too much fear, too much division. Here and now, I give you my word. If you entrust me with the presidency, I will draw on the best of us, not the worst. I will be an ally of the light, not the darkness.
This marks the conclusion of a 4-day Democratic convention that was held virtually because of the pandemic. Responding, President Trump tweeted that Biden's agenda is just words, claiming the former senator and vice president has done none of the things he spoke about during his 47 years in politics. Trump is expected to accept his party's nomination next week to face Biden in the November 3rd presidential election.
And that's all I can tell you. And it could be.
South Korea's exports in the first 20 days of August declined by the same amount percentage-wise as they did last month, a decline of 7% according to the Korea Customs Service compared to the same period last year. Exports so far this month came to $23.1 billion. It was the 5th straight month of on-year declines as the pandemic disrupts global trade and production. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for making time today.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, stocks on Wall Street recovered some of the previous day's decline on Thursday despite worries about the economy. Tech stocks helped push the Nasdaq to yet another new high. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, there's a clearly discrepancy between what's happening to the economy versus the equity market. And the market that is leading is obviously the Nasdaq, the tech sector, and the growth stocks. If you look at the Nasdaq, it climbed by 1.1% yesterday, closing at newest high as the tech gained its very strong run over yesterday. Some of the other growth stocks like bio and also the renewable energy did some decline, but overall, the tech sector led the market. In terms of the macro side, the Labor Department reported that the jobless claims totaled 1.106 million last week, well above expectation of 923,000. Clearly, there is a concern about the climbing of new COVID-19 patients. That's happening since global scale, definitely happening in Korea as well as the Europe, and overall this is putting some pressure for the market. I think that the uncertainty for the overall market should remain somewhat, despite that the tech sector and the NASDAQ will continue to run on the basis of strong earnings. The reason for that is because, once again, the sentiment seems to be cooling in regards to the economic growth rate recovery because of the COVID-19 incident, and that seems to be the case for the global economy overall. So we are expecting the overall the volatility might be coming for the equity market, but not to the trend where it will start the massive decline, but it's just that people will need more confirmation for economies to recover in order for the equity market to show further strong rise.
Well, the Korean market's also recovering from big losses yesterday. The Kospi now back up above 2,300 points. What was driving the trade today?
Yes, yesterday, if you look at it, Korean market plummeted. It showed 3.6% decline. The Kosdaq also declined quite significantly. And the reason for that kind of decline is because of the huge rise that we saw from the beginning of this year. Before this kind of crash, we had Kospi rising almost 10%, Kosdaq rising by almost 25%. And from the bottom, Kosdaq was up almost 100%. So we clearly needed some kind of breather. On top of that, the concern about the COVID-19 incident, we are seeing record high numbers. And the government is saying that the possibility of additional shutdowns could happen if this kind of new patients rise happening. But despite all that, Kospi had recovered today because U.S. market was very strong yesterday. As I told you, that NASDAQ was up about 1% and S&P was up 0.3% yesterday. Obviously, that kind of flowed through to Korea. But Korea also has some kind of volatilities, and we did see Kosdaq going down by more than 1% today, and Kospi basically, losing most of its steam during the day. But towards the end of the day, it did recover, and the Kospi was up 1.3%, and Kosdaq was up 0.6%. I think that we need more numbers in the future. We need to see the real earnings story. We need to see real economic recovery story. Without those, we think that the Kospi and Kosdaq will show volatility going into the future. Some positive news, though, is that the possibility of capital gains tax, the largest shareholders' requirement, or the ones that needs to pay the taxes, the total amount of investment will remain to be about $1 billion. It was expected to go down to 0.3 billion in year 2023 or 22, but it seems that government is considering that this will not change in the future. If that's the case, definitely it's a positive news, and the liquidity condition remains to be very strong in Korea. So therefore, it should support the Korean equity market. At least it's not going to result into a massive decline in terms of share prices.
Well, speaking of real numbers, last month we saw Korea's producer prices rising just barely from the month before by 0.2%, but it was a rise for the second month in a row. We're almost out of time, but what stands out to you about these numbers?
Yes, I think that most of this rise is probably due to the overall oil price rise and some of the demand pickup. But I don't think that this kind of price rise can continue because the third quarter economic growth rate or recovery seems to be quite weak for the time being because of the COVID-19. So we need to watch out how strong these numbers will be. And also we probably need to look at more of consumer price numbers. We need to see demand pick up in order for the overall margins and overall economic conditions to be good in the future. So we'll watch closely of what's happening to consumer price in the future.
Indeed. All right, Mr. Yu, thanks so much for coming on today, and have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you very much.
Parts of Seoul are going to go dark for 5 minutes on Saturday night to mark the 17th Energy Day. The city will turn off the lights of major buildings at 9 p.m. Korea time in a show of support for the battle against climate change. The buildings taking part include landmarks like Namsan Tower and Lotte World. Energy Day was established by the Korean government back in 2004 to call attention to global warming and to get people on board with the idea of saving energy. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.